Yeah. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody from wherever you are. And welcome to today's webinar from the Purple Foundation on getting your products certified for the high-level API certification, which was launched last November. And we want to tell everybody about it and how it works. And to do that, I have Tim Winters from QA Cafe, and he's the chair of the Purple Foundation Testing Committee, which is designing all these certifications. And I'm going to hand things off to him in just a minute. We are using Zoom for this webinar. So if you haven't used Zoom before for webinars, a couple things to note. You can adjust your screen if you have trouble reading something, but most of what Tim is doing is slides, so you should be okay. And if you do have questions for Tim, feel free to ask them at any time, but do use the question and answer tool in your webinar, in your Zoom control panel, as that will let us sort of see who's asking what and triage them a little bit better. And we'll do all the Q&A at the end, but feel free to interact with questions while we're going. Yeah, so this is exciting. It's the first one of the year. We're going to have probably a lot more this year on the webinar front. Just sit back, relax, and Tim will explain everything about Purple high-level API certification.
Oh, all right. I'm going to go ahead and take over. I think Jason's going to step back now. So today we're going to talk about products certified for Purple, and we're mostly going to focus on two parts here. We're going to talk a little bit about the high-level API and just Purple certification in general today. So the agenda, for those who aren't familiar, I'm going to do a little bit of introduction into Purple, the problem statement, Purple certification, why we went about doing this. And then I'm going to talk about the certification we launched in November, as Jason mentioned, the high-level API. And then a lot of people ask about future certifications. And then last, we're going to give you some hints on how to get involved if you're really interested in these things. As Jason mentioned, feel free to write questions. I'll probably wait to answer them till the end. But please feel free to put in questions at any time. So first thing, who is Purple? Purple is a foundation that is driven by our mission is to enable high velocity innovation for customer premise equipment. So those people who aren't aware, there's some key things, tenets of this group is they're going to use the latest open standards, open APIs. And the big thing here is open source reference implementations that people can go download, grab, use. They collaborate with other forums in the space. So Broadband Forum and Wi-Fi Alliance come to mind. And the idea here is to get operators, software developers, application developers, all of these people together in one place to drive innovation. So how do we do that? Simplification is a big part of it, trying to make sure that we can simplify the process of CPE, putting them out into the world for operators, for the middleware guys, for everybody. Innovation, when you do that, you allow people to innovate faster because they're worrying about the innovation and not other factors. Obviously, collaboration is a big part of this, right? Is everybody working together is better than people working individually apart from one another. It allows for, raising the level of the sea as everyone works together, makes just the ecosystem better. So Purple drives to do this in many different ways. One of the areas, and we're going to talk about today, is the CPE industry today. One of the problems it has is there are many different middleware platforms that exist, and these platforms, for many, many years, they had to go and customize for particular SOCs, board designs. So when a middleware operator was building a platform, they had to go find all of the SOCs, go through the board design, and then additionally, they would have to then talk with each operator and almost make specific middleware builds for each operator, right? And so that was the market that we existed in. This impacts operators' ability to innovate because all this fragmentation means that they have to then make sure that every rev coming out, every firmware version that comes out, they have to make sure that they can adopt it, that it integrates with their other tools. Testing, everything, the cost was more expensive. On the flip side, this wasn't great either for the software and application vendors, right? Because what they would have to do is they would have to track down every middleware component. If you're an application, you have to find all the different middleware vendors and operators and work with them. On the middleware side, you have to find a SOC, work with it. All of this isn't scalable. So the problem we were having is none of this is scalable. So open source resolves a lot of these issues. One thing it doesn't necessarily prevent is fragmentation. So what's going on there is, anybody can grab an open source project, fork it, and then all of a sudden you have more fragmentation. Open source makes it a little bit easier to fragment than previously. So these fragmentation all leads to more work, more effort. It's not what we want. We want to keep the industry together, try to keep everyone moving forward. And so how do we do that? We certification. So what Purple pushes for is this allows middleware platforms to define a common core of well-defined functions, behaviors, and APIs. So everybody's looking at the same APIs, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. It reduces fragmentation in that certification allows for people to confirm that, yes, this is running on exactly what I think it's running on. It has the existing APIs. It's been verified to work, and you kind of build the stack on top of that. And that allows us to reduce fragmentation. The certification helps, makes it easier for people to see, like, yes, these parts work together, they've been tested. And that's where certification is helpful. How we got to Purple certification. So as Jason mentioned, we launched this in November. We created a certification task working group that's I'm the chair of, and that working group has the goal, and I have the charter in a minute, I'll show. The working group goal is to interact with other working groups inside of the Purple ecosystem to create certification programs. A couple of the highlights of that group are, what Purple certification drives at. One thing that's a big is self-testing certification. So this allows people to run the testing by themselves. There are many other certification programs in various spaces that I'm sure you're familiar with. They require going to labs in some cases, going to running the tool, at the lab in-house. One of the highlights of this program was, hey, we want people to be able to self-test. We want them to be able to get a tool, run the testing on their own. They can include it in their CI/CD, give people the option to do it on their own without having to go through the process of going to a lab. Another highlight is this is going to be certifications are going to be listed on the Purple website. So this makes it easy for people to go to a website, find what devices, what components, what things have Purple certification. There's one location for it. It makes it easy, as opposed to, a certification program that might have stickers that are on every box. People have got to find them. It's buried in documentation. This is going to be a public list that lists all of the things they do. The certifications that Purple did, they have very clear ecosystems, which I'm going to talk about. It's Purpleware that includes several different components, including Purple OS, the high-level API, which we've launched, Purple Mesh, and lifecycle management. Additional ones that, that align with the industry are low-level API. That's really focused on people who build boards, SOC, the low-level API. And then application is the flip side of that, the one sitting on top of it, who want to create an ecosystem and have applications that run on top of the CPEs, which is a growing new market that we've seen a lot of interest in. So those are the initial certifications that, sort of, I'll call it the roadmap. These don't all exist today, but that's the plan of where we're headed with these certifications. That's the program that we want to actually create. So to make this easier, here's a little visual of how Purple is broken up. And as you can see, on the one side, we have certification, and that's the group that we're going to talk about today. It has the task of working with all of these other different groups, the Wi-Fi, Purple Mesh, Purple OS, the low-level API I mentioned, the high-level API we're going to focus on today. And then there's a lifecycle management group that's focused on container application interactions, those third-party gateway apps and services, interacting with those. And then we also have a security working group that's focused on the security of Purple OS, which is great. So all of these, the certifications group, as output comes out from these individual groups, works with them to create a certification program so that people using these components can make sure, A, they're using them right and they're going to work. And then B, it gives a level of confidence to those users. So here's the charter of the certification working group. So, the big things here I mentioned, the highlights are there are 3 different types of certification. One is the Purpleware, which includes the high-level API, which we're going to talk about, low-level deliverables, and third-party apps and services. And that uses the high-level API. And the big thing here, again, I just want to drive home this is enabling self-testing. We want to allow people to get the tools, grab the tools, go off and run the testing on their own. So that has some benefits. And that's really what this group is chartered to do today. And we work with, experts in all different spaces. As you can see, certification is kind of a unique working group in that it has to deal with the low level and the app side. So it's definitely a unique task that we've been asked to do, which is fun. We've really enjoyed working on this. So the big question everyone wants to know is, okay, now we've got the certification working group, how do I get certified? So these are the 3 steps. Test execution. So as a user, when you're doing your certification, you come along and you have to execute the test. You have to run the test using a certified tool. And I'll talk a little bit more about the details of that, but it's really simple in that you execute the test, you run it on your own. You can do this as part of your CI/CD on a regular basis. You can do this at one-off when you're ready, when your firmware is baked, you can run the test execution. People have been doing this in all different ways. Some people bake it in on a regular basis, bake in different components, pick and choose. You run the testing as you go along, and when you're ready, you pick a firmware version, you run all of the tests. You execute them, you get the results, right? So now you have all these passing results, everything's working the way that you want, you can submit them, right? And there's no, test execution is happening in-house. So you don't have to share any of those results. You don't have to worry if you start off and you're having all kinds of issues. You run the testing, it's totally, the tool's available. You can run it on your own at your own speed. Whether you want to go fast or slow, it's up to you. You can do all of that. Then you have to submit the results. And here you have to make sure that it's running on Purpleware components. You have to run it in the environment, make sure that your firmware is set, your versioning, all of that stuff that you want to promote, that you want to get certified on. You do all of that. You submit the results. And then the 3rd step is pretty straightforward. There's a review by a technical committee, approval, and then we list you. So it's really that easy. It's just execute the test, you submit the results, and then there's a review and approval and listing. So here we go into a little bit more details. So if you're a certification requester, what are the requirements? If you're trying to get certified, what do you have to do? So a couple things here. You have to be a Purple member, right? There's a lot of work that goes into this that, there's value in the Purple membership. We want you to participate as part of the community and do this certification testing. So that's required. Second requirement is it has to be done on Purpleware components. You can't be running it on other, when you run the testing, it should be run. So if you're doing Purple Mesh, you have to have Purple OS underneath it. All of that stuff, these test cases can be run if you're running on other architecture. So if you're running on OpenWRT or something else, like RDKB, you can go and run these tests. They'll run fine. But for the actual certification, the idea here is we're trying to make sure that we can guarantee that they interact correctly with Purpleware components. So the testing must be performed on Purpleware. It's performed on certifiable versions of Purpleware, so you want to show that it interacts correctly. That's the same situation. Passing results in the certification tool. So this sounds a little odd. I've worked in certification programs where they allow waivers or a percentage of test cases pass. In this case, I think we've made it the easiest we can in that, you have to have passing results from the certification tools. Depending on the components you're applying for, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, we have core features, which everybody has to do. Those are features that, every Purple OS or Purple Mesh or low-level API must have. And then there are optional features. And an example I give here, a very common one we get are, different interfaces. So not everyone's going to have a PON interface, or not everyone's going to have a Wi-Fi 7 chip in it. There are different aspects, and we consider those optional features. If you have them, you test them. If you don't need to test them, right? We're not going to require everyone to have PON. If it's a DOCSIS or if it's an Ethernet interface, that's okay. You don't have to run the PON test. So that's kind of, we have core features and optional. The idea here is if you have, they're high level, we're not nitpicking individual test cases. We're trying to push, everyone forward as a group. And the last thing for the requester they have to do, we're going to have an application fee. There's a lot of work that goes into this with the website. It's very low. It's going to be less than 5,000. We haven't decided. The board is discussing what that value should be, but it's really just to recover costs. It's not to make money off of from the form. It's kept in a very low. There's several certifications that are very, very expensive in the $50,000 or $40,000. That's not what we're looking to do. It's really just to recoup cost of running all of these services and keeping them up. So that's what a requester has to do. They have to be a valid Purple member. You have to run it on Purpleware, and you have to have passing results are the main things here. For operators, and this is really for anyone requiring the certification, check that the components are on the list. Make sure when you're working with your customers and software that as these certifications come online, that you're checking, hey, do they have the high-level API certification? I'm an app, and I want to make sure I run on these things. Can I say I work on these? Do they have the high-level API? Another thing we want from operators is we want feedback on the testing content. Please take a look at the testing, what we're trying to test, the features that you consider core features that need to be there. We want feedback from the field, right? These certifications are only as good as they're helping users. So that's an area that we want feedback from operators. So for requesters, you're off running the testing. We want to make sure that people who need to use the certification, whether it's operators or vendors, whatever it is, your OEM, everyone's checking these lists and making sure that you have that information so that you can use it. So what we have today. So today we have one certification available. We're bringing more online, and we'll talk about that more later. But today we have a high-level API certification. There's a test plan. I put a link in it. It exists today. So the details of this test plan, it utilizes the Purple data model that's based on the Broadband Forum 216 data model. The Broadband Forum just put out 217. I think it was less than a month ago. We'll move to that when the time is right. But right now it's based on 216. It's also based on Purple OS 3.0. So that data model that we're currently verifying that all of those features are there is based on Purple OS 3.0. As more versions of Purple OS come out, we will update the data model appropriately. So let's say 3.0.1 comes out or 3.1 comes out, we will keep data models for each one that are properly revisioned and based to make sure that, hey, you know which one you're running on. So if you're running on 3.0, you can be sure that all of those high-level API data model parameters that you want to touch are there, right? The reason we're doing the certification is so that high-level API is a really good one in that there are a lot of parameters and objects. Purple has this really cool implementation of high-level API. So applications can know what parameters and objects are there, and this is what enables that. So it's why we did the first certification. It's pretty well defined in that we have this data model and we know exactly what parameters are in it. So to execute the testing, so we have this data model. How do we execute the testing? So we use USP. Right now on your WAN interface, you have to have USP for the certification, and you can use MQT or Stomp to connect. And we run through and we test, 17 over 1,750 parameters and objects. We make sure that you can write them, read them, make sure they have the right parameters, they return the right statuses. It's funny, if you look at the test plan, I think it's 5 test cases, but it's really a lot of testing. You have to make sure you have all the parameters and objects set correctly. And this is so that when you're certified, if you ship this to someone, they know that when they do these writes, that it matches the actual data model. One thing that we're working on that I just want to note, because this has come up several times, if you have a TR69 WAN, so we've had a couple of operators and indicate that, hey, we're not ready to put USP on our WAN, full USP. We're going to have a period where we're running, both TR69 and USP, or TR69 for a little bit longer as we move over to USP. Eventually, we don't have it today. We're going to have a tool that's focused on the newest USP 1.3 has this definition of Unix domain sockets. So this means that an application running on the CPE would be able to use USP and connect and run all of these high-level API. So in that case, that's going to be a future revision. We're going to make that available. It's not available today. So if you're looking to run the testing right now, yes, you need to have a USP agent on your WAN interface that's able to connect over MQTT or Stomp to run all of these testing. We also do support WebSocket for this too. The current data model doesn't have the WebSocket ones, but if you're interested in that, please reach out to me. We can help you set that up. I haven't seen anybody do that yet, but it is available in the tool. We just don't have the data model parameters set that way. And the last thing for executing this, you have to have a certification tool. So CD Router 14.1 is the current version. There was previous ones you could grab and run some of the high-level API testing. That testing was based on 2.3. Now we've moved to Purple OS 3.0. To do that, you have to be running on 14.1. So if you have a CD router, please update it to 14.1 to run these test cases. It's got its own expansion. It's 5 test cases. You have to set USP up, and then it will go and run all of these test cases. It's pretty rapid. It takes about 20 minutes total to run all of them through. So that's the good news for this high-level API. It's not very long. It goes through and we do get sets, get the entire data model, we add them. This is really just checking that these parameters exist. More on how we test the functionality in a minute. But that's really what the high-level API is in a nutshell, is we do this USP, we check all these data models, we make sure that we can verify them, that they work. And this is so that an application that's running on a gateway would be able to use them and know that those parameters work, or underneath something trying to make sure that, hey, what are my Wi-Fi settings, that all those values work from top to bottom. So that's what's really cool about the high-level API. More on just general certifications. So the next certification, high-level API, is out and available. People can test it. Purple OS is the next one we're going to take on. This is a big component. It's a big part of Purple. And so there's a lot of testable content in it. There's a lot of things we can test. One of the things we thought we would start with to kind of help us scope this testing as a certification working group, we talked about this, and we're going to scope the testing to high-level API functionality. So what do I mean by that? What I mean by high-level API functionality is we're going to take those data model parameters that we verified that they exist. We're going to set them, and we're going to set those variables and set those parameters, set those objects, and make sure that the operating system underneath it acts accordingly. So I've given a couple of examples here. Setting the IP address of a WAN interface, easy. Setting ports in a firewall. These are things that people will want to do. We set the ports and make sure that they don't go through and they're blocked in a firewall test. Set the DHCP pool and make sure that the LAN clients are appropriate. Wireless settings, just setting the SSID, setting the encryption, setting the keys. All of these things are easy test cases that we can do. The upside of using the high-level API functionality and focusing on that is, A, we'll have the certification, so we'll know that those parameters exist and work. And then the other upside is it makes it so we can automate it, so that we can use USP to configure those settings on the box and then immediately run the test cases. So users aren't spending a lot of time trying to configure their DUTs. We want to make the certification as easy as possible and as useful as possible. So that's how operators are going to do it. Operators are going to use the high-level API and USP to configure these boxes. They are not going to log into every CPE and configure it. So that's kind of why we headed this direction. The Purple OS certification is going to be based on the 3X series. And I say X because I'm not sure when it will come out, which versions will be available, but it will be on the 3s. Some version of the 3s as well will be the first Purple OS. This is one where we want as much input as we can get from operators for really important functionality. We're also working with the Purple OS group on functionality that they're putting in to the next releases and making sure that we're checking those areas. So as Purple OS is like, hey, we're working on this feature, we're working on that feature, we're going to make sure, like, we're going to work on Wi-Fi 7 as an example. We're going to make sure that we have certification that we're checking those test cases in Purple OS. So Purple OS is our next, it's ongoing. We're going to have a test plan that we're going to start in the next month that'll be available for people to review. We want as much feedback as we can get. I think this certification will be available sometime this year. I think when is a great question. We would love to have it as soon as possible. Everybody wants this one. We just have to work through what features we want to verify. So we want as much input as we can get on that. So if you have any questions about that, please put them, or any thoughts, you can put them in the Q&A window, or you can reach out. I have a slide later about how you get involved that will, give you an idea of how, if you're interested in this, how you can get access and how you can give your input, which is what we want. Other future certifications. So this is a big question I get a lot of times when I present on this. People come and they're like, hey, what's the roadmap? When are these coming out? When can I start using these? When can I start requiring them? We've got a lot of operator interest. So here's the future certifications that we're going to work on. We're going to have Purple Mesh and LCM. They're really part of the Purpleware extensions. So in that earlier chart I showed with the Purpleware in the middle, these are the guys, LCMs on the one side, and the Purple Mesh One of the things about Purple Mesh is that we don't expect every Purpleware component to have it. Not everyone's going to include Purple Mesh for a variety of reasons. So this is why it's an extension. Okay, if you're implementing Purple Mesh and you have it running and you want to see it works with Purple OS, we're going to have a certification for that. So that one's, unlike high-level API that comes with Purple OS, Purple Mesh is going to be one of the ones that's an extension that people can go and run if they have it. If they don't, they won't need to. So that's an area we're working. It's nicely integrated with Purple OS. That's been an ongoing effort. So there's a lot of good stuff for us to work on there. Purple Mesh is a really cool technology that Purple does, and having a certification for that. I do want to focus. It's not on the Wi-Fi side. It's not the Easy Mesh certification. Just to be clear, this comes up every once in a while. This is really just making sure, hey, the data models are there, the objects are there, we can set things, and that you're actually running on Purple Mesh. The Easy Mesh certification and all of that is a different, go to the Purple Mesh group if you're really into that. We're not talking about the Wi-Fi Alliance certifications. This is really a Purple certification for verifying that you're running Purple Mesh and you're using all those components as you think. LCM really is containers, making sure that that's running, that you're able to bring up containers, bring them down. All of the permissions, all of that is rolled into that group. And the other two, the next two are the longer two. So Purple Mesh and LCM, we're planning on starting in 24. I don't know if we're going to have the certifications ready by the end of the year. Fingers crossed, we might. But those two we're going to start working on. So you'll see test plans for Purple Mesh and LCM. The other two, I'm about to talk about low-level API and applications, are two longer-term ones. We might start on them in 24, but realistically, we will not be seeing certification for those until probably 25. We got to work with those groups. Both of those have interesting things in that we don't have an existing test tool today. So CD Router can work for almost all of the Purpleware components today. Low-level API and applications, we need to add additional test tooling, which is kind of why we push them. Those are going to take us a little bit longer. We can't just take tooling that we have existing today. We have to add additional points for verifying the low-level API, making sure that all of those functionality exists. And on the application side, this has been a hot one and a really interesting space. And we've seen a lot of interest and we're excited about it. We just have to do some work on figuring out what the best way. On the last Purple Summit, there were some really cool demos. I know we've got some summits planned that are going to have great applications. I think we're going to follow up on that work in 25 and create some certifications that allow people to say, hey, my application has a certification. The idea here is, hey, the app was certified. That means it can run on any Purple OS or any infrastructure. And again, this helps everybody. The application vendor doesn't have to track down and try to convince people that it runs on all of this. They can have the certification. And for operators, it's a plug and play situation. They'll know the application can run on their Purple components. And so this is the upside to certification. I think Purple's done a really great job. I've worked with lots of certifications over the years. My background, I started at the UNH IOL 20 years ago. And so I've seen lots of certification programs. I think this one's really unique in that it's very low. It's low touch. It's not a whole lot of work. You don't have to go through rigmaroles of making sure you have all these paper pushing, you have all these other certifications, all these other problems. It's very much focused on the issues at hand, which is really great. So, as we move forward with these certifications, this is going to allow the whole Purple ecosystem to grow. So we're excited about that. That's kind of where we're headed with this. So just to refresh, Purpleware certification, we're looking to work on those in 24. And in 25, we're going to have some low-level API and application certifications. So one more question I often get, hey, how do I get involved with certification? So there's a couple of things I have here. There's a Confluence space. If you're a Purple member, you have access to the Confluence. Just look up CERT and you will find we have a nice Confluence space that has all of our meeting minutes. If you missed them, there are recordings there. Our meetings happen on Monday. It's every other Monday. So we just had one this week, so it won't be for another 2 weeks. But there's a calendar. Go look. We have bi-weekly meetings. They're usually about 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how many things we have to talk about. We have a Jira board, too, that allows you to write in issues. So if you have test cases and you think of it, we work asynchronously. You can throw stuff up there, put it on the list, and we'll cover it. As we get more test plans, I actually expect that board to become a lot more certifications, more test plans. I think we're going to see a lot more information on that board. And the last way is, hey, if you have any questions, there's a mailing list. Feel free to use it. There's also a Slack room For those who are really into Slack and Purple, using that to communicate, you can reach out to me there. I'm available there, but there's also an entire channel you can go to you can ask any certification or testing question you might have. So I'm at the 30 minutes. I only wanted to talk for 30 minutes, so we had time to have some questions. So I think we're at the end, Jason.
Indeed. All right. Thanks, Tim. Uh,
Yeah.
so you had the how to get involved slide up there. I did want to touch on what people should do to start asking about certification. Um, just as a first question to sort of throw it out there and get the conversation started with the people that are on here, because I have a feeling that at least for the people who we've seen registered for the webinar, um, there's a lot of non-Purple members here too. So I
Yeah.
want people to understand sort of the process there.
Yeah, I mean, my advice to someone who's not a Purple member or isn't heavily involved is, hey, go look at the test tool, look at the test plan. If you have a CD router, if you don't have a CD router, I would start there. Go look at, see what your options are, how you get a hold of one. There's test plans there. In this case, most of the people in the CPE industry have a CD router. It's hooking it up, running the test cases, making sure you have USP, what other functionality you support, and then start running the test cases. You're not going to pass out of the box. This is going to be a little bit of an effort. You have to check, there's a lot of parameters there. You want to make sure all of this works together. So, I'd start there. Hey, set it up, make sure you have a nightly run of testing, those kind of things going. I think that would be the path I would take and kind of like integrate it into your process. While you can do it as a one standoff, I do encourage people should probably just keep this as part of your process. That way, in a CI/CD environment, you can push a release right at any time and instantly get certified. It's a very low process, and that there's no labs. You don't have to wait weeks. I've been part of IPv6 test programs that it was 6 months to get in the lab, right? And you had to wait 6 months to get a certification. This program is really cool that way, and you don't have to do that. You can instantly, you can be running the testing and get it at your speed. There's not a cert wave. That's another advantage of this program. You don't have to wait for a plug fest or wait for a certification event. You can do it on your own time in your own lab. And so I think that's one of the big benefits. So if you're not familiar with Purple, another thing is if you're not moved over to Purple, I get this question a lot, like, hey, I'm not running Purple OS yet. Can I run these test cases? Absolutely. It's USP and a data model. You can start running these now, and as you integrate components, check them off and cherry pick individual test cases. It doesn't have to be a waterfall situation where you're like, oh, we should wait to run these test cases till the end. Please don't do that. Start running them now, take your components and run them all the time, right? And I think that's a really great way to move forward.
Cool. Yeah. So if people do have questions, please type them into the Q&A panel and we can get to some of them. Another question that I was thinking of was to explain a little bit about, because you do list the Unix domain socket internally as an option. So people who aren't familiar with that, that's in TR369 in the user services platform 1.3. There is a definition of a message transfer protocol that is internal, right? We call it the IMTP. And that entire plan was spearheaded by the Purple Foundation to create an interoperable platform for applications, right? That can talk USB. So, but that also opens up the door for the fact that you can be communicating with the agent over that Unix domain socket. So what's the difference between the way that works now for the high level certification versus
Yeah.
versus what it will be for when there's an actual application certification?
Yeah, so two things about that. One is I thought this was a really cool example of two forums working together, right? And that Purple had this problem where they were like, hey, we want to use this on the back end. We want to have these applications and other things be able to use this high-level API. They went to the broadband forum and everybody worked together. And they came up with this solution as, hey, we'll put in this IMTP, this internal USP service to make things easier. How it's going to work in the future, what we envision is actually right now, as I said, where you have USP on the front end and we're just hitting all these perimeters. Eventually, we'll put out a tool that will sit on the CPE and be able to do the high-level API over the Unix socket. So as this becomes a little bit more defined as 1.3, this is a pretty new concept. So we're kind of seeing how things were going. There's some broker work happening for those who aren't familiar. all that's ongoing. We've done some initial testing and we've actually been excited. We've managed to, we did some stuff in December where we were able to run some of these test cases. So the way it'll look in the future is you'll get a application or container that you'll put on your CPE, and then we will do the same high-level API testing and run the same USP messages that we run from the WAN. And it should work, in a perfect world, right? They should be the same. That's kind of what we're aiming for, right? Is you should be
Right.
able to touch a parameter whether you're in the cloud or you're sitting right on the CPE. That parameter's
Right.
value should be the same.
It'll simultaneously prove whether or not this entire crazy plan worked, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's going to be a good time. I'm looking forward to it.
We have a question here.
Yep.
If we're in the process of migrating to Purple, do we run all of the high-level API tests and then look through our results to see what we passed for the migrated components?
Yeah. So this is a really good question. So what I recommend here is, hey, you can run all the high-level API tests. We have a really nice summary that says, hey, which parameters passed, which parameters didn't. Oh, you're missing. I ran one yesterday where the Wi-Fi had no Wi-Fi interfaces, so all the Wi-Fi tests didn't fail. That might be expected. You might not be ready to integrate your wireless solution, so it's really clear, like, oh, none of the Wi-Fi parameters. We know that we're not doing it. So I think users can do that. We don't have a way now to kind of break it up. You do have to look at the summary and know, okay, I didn't do those, right? And so the idea being, it lists the number of parameters that you've missed. It gives a number like, oh, we're at 163. I don't want to say it's a bug burn down, but a lot of people I've talked to, that's sort of what they're doing. They are doing burn down where they're making sure they get those parameters working in groups. And so I think that's kind of the way I would recommend doing that, is running them all. I think if this isn't, originally people wanted to keep them as 5 test cases. I think the other option down the line is if people find that they do want to cherry pick them, we could break out the test plan. It would be a lot, it's 1,000 parameters, so it would be a lot of test cases, but if that's the direction we want to go, we can. But right now, what we've done is we keep it as a summary, and we found pretty good success with that. So that's kind of what I would recommend is, yes, you have to open it. There's a nice summary that shows which parameters passed, which parameters didn't, and so you can focus on the ones that didn't work.
Cool. I had a related question before I get to one of the other questions that came up in the panel.
Yep.
And I don't know if you have the answer to this, or if any of the Purple folks who are lurking in the audience right now might have a better answer. But the Purple data model, right, is a combination of two things, right? It's an importation of the relevant data model pieces from the official TR-181 data model, right?
Yeah.
And then also some additional Purple Foundation vendor extensions, right?
Yeah.
Where can people find that?
Yeah, there's a Confluence page. If you look it up, it's the Purple data model, and we've made a full profile. So one thing about that is, if you've ever this is for the data model geeks in the group. There's a lot of them. What happens is we have the Broadband Forum has this great tooling that allows you to put out the full HTML. So it lists all the 181 parameters that we're importing. It's a little intimidating at first because you open that HTML and you see all these 181 parameters, but we've created a Purple. There's a Purple OS profile. So we've used the profiling system built into the data model so that you can say, hey, Purple baseline _2 is the one that's being tested right now. And that gives you all of the TR-181 plus any Purple. Purple's done a really good job too. This is, again, great collaboration. A lot of the changes in the last data model we made were incorporating parameters that were Purple, a specific extension that have now turned into 181. And we're going to do the same thing for 217. There's going to be way less Purple. Every time we put out a new data model, there's way less Purple specific parameters. There's a lot more of they become 181 and we're taking those. And then that's really our goal, is to incorporate those. So there's a baseline profile. You can click on it, and that shows all of the parameters that we've, selected from the TR-181 data model. So yeah, it's based on that with these additional it's not the full data model, right? That's not what we were going for. So it's not every parameter that's in 181. It's the ones that are relevant to Purple and selected. And we used the Broadband Forum profiling mechanism for that. So that was fun.
Okay. So for those not familiar with the Purple certification, what if a CPE does not support USP but TR-69 only? Is that still allowed for
Yeah.
certification?
So right now, you wouldn't be able to get certified. And there's a couple things going on here that I wanted to talk about. The reason the reason that you cannot use TR69 is not because we hate TR69, we don't. But there are data model parameters that objects and operators, operates and commands that exist in that data model that cannot be on, it cannot be on TR69 data model, right? So you can't do a command or an operator. Those don't exist. You can't do them. So we can't use TR69 to do those functions. Those functions don't exist. It's one of the, USP existed. They added these new features and the Purple data model takes advantage of it. So you can't use full coverage of it. Which is unfortunate. It's not great, but that's kind of where we're at. And so that's the reality of it. So what we did, we wanted to make it clear, hey, you have to use USP. I had a note in here about this. If you are planning to be TR69, you're going to have to wait for the IMTP or the UDS things that Jason talked about earlier, right? So that's going to have to be your mechanism. You're going to have to wait for a tool that runs it over the back end to do the high level API certification. When it comes to the other certifications, the Purple OS, I think some of that testing will be able to be done using TR69. And that's kind of what we'll go where it makes sense. But as I mentioned, right, the high level API has these requirements where you can't do certain functionality. In particular, it gets really dicey with containers and applications running on top of it. That's where USP is superior. And so those are where we kind of, the rubber meets the road. You can get a lot of coverage through the TR69, but we can't do them all. And so the certification is focused on USP for that reason. It's a good question.
Yeah, so I'll throw out a question just for the people who might be not Purple members. How do people join, and at what level do people need to be members in order to participate in the certification?
So it's just that they have to be a Purple member. I think the current requirement says, hey, you can, any type of membership. I am not a Purple membership expert. There are other people who will help you with that. I strongly suggest you reach out to them for that. But you can be any membership. It's not limited to the super gold people. Everybody, if you're a Purple member, you're allowed to be certified and be listed of any type. It's a good question.
Here's one that I think you had touched on, but it might help bear repeating. We can use the CD router Purple high level API expansion in CI/CD process to validate Purple development, and what are the number of tests and the time of execution?
Yeah, so I said earlier it's 5 tests, but that's a little misleading. It's 1,000 parameters that run over 5 tests right now for the high level API. It takes 15 to 20 minutes depending on reboot, other things. It's not very long actually. I'm aware of one customer who does it per commit. Every time their engineers commit something, it's part of their pipeline and they run it. So it's definitely it's pretty short for this one. As more certification comes online, you might not want to do that. I envision probably a lot of people will put it in their nightly runs, right? They'll run it every night and run the full certification gambit. CI/CD sometimes is a little bit different than full certification in that we might have some stability or performance test that you wouldn't want to run in a nightly or CI/CD setup. But I think we can work through that. Most of the content, the idea here is that it can be reused. It should be reused. For that. So right now it's a pretty quick run for the high level API actually.
Yeah, 20 minutes is actually incredibly short considering, right?
Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, we haven't gotten crazy yet as things go on, it gets really nutty when you start doing like the DHCP lease times and so some of those test cases, which are entirely valid, push out your testing time. But in this case, it's very rapid. Each test case takes a minute or two. Most of it's actually just setting the device up. Once it's rebooted and up, actually it runs very quickly.
And in reference to my previous question, Shelly courteously just sent a message to everyone in the chat.
Oh,
So
perfect.
if you do have membership questions, you can reach out to her. It's shelly.cohen@purplefoundation.org.
Perfect. Thanks, Shelly.
All right. Okay. Well, if there are any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. What is you can reach out to the CERT working group email, I think is a good one. It's probably the best one to use.
Yep, you can do that. Also, if you're just looking for me, it's just my full name, Timothy Winters at Purple Foundation. Timothy.Winters at purplefoundation.org. But all of
Cool.
this, just go to the Confluence page. You can search around, type in CERT, and you can't miss us. We're right there. All this information is posted there.
All right. Cool. Well, thank you everyone for coming today to our first webinar of the year. And I did want to mention that we're going to have some more. And we'll be putting out a list of what those webinars look like in the near future. Um, I I have a guess that the next one is going to be kind of a high level overview of Purple, um, maybe from our new chief architect, and
Mm, that'll be
and
fun.
right,
I'm looking forward to that
and
one. Yeah, I'd
and
love to
that'll
hear.
kind of set the stage for a lot of other things. Um, so be on the lookout for stuff like that, either on LinkedIn. You can follow Purple Foundation on LinkedIn. That's our best social media platform. Or if you are, if I think, Shelley, correct me if I'm wrong, is that anyone can join that mailing list, or that's right now we just have that for members, right? I don't know if we have a newsletter.
And yeah, that's for members. Yeah, that's for members right now.
Yeah. So if you are a member, you'll get email updates about those things too. But other than that, yeah, thanks a lot, everybody. And we hope to see you next time. This will be recorded. It has been recorded. We will send the video out to everybody after we're done, as well as the slide deck. So that's usually the most common question. So
Yeah,
we'll get
awesome.
that to
Thanks.
you all. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye.